The story you are about to hear is a compilation of documented true facts featuring historical characters, events, or places that has played a role in shaping history. Please sit back and listen as I recite this narrative for you. The Ann Arbor Hospital Murders were the murders of 11 patients by unauthorized administration in their IV of a curare drug Pavulon in an Ann Arbor, Michigan Veterans Administration hospital during 1975. Following a vast FBI investigation into the deaths, Filipino nurses Filipina Narciso and Lenora Perez were charged with murder, but only found guilty on poisoning and conspiracy charges. Public opinion was against prosecution of the nurses on the basis that they could have had only the most trivial of possible motives for conspiring to commit such extremely serious crimes, and the case was dropped after a retrial was ordered. Over 6 weeks during July and August 1975, 27 patients at the Michigan Veterans Administration Hospital in Ann Arbor, Michigan, suffered respiratory failure that left them unable to breathe without mechanical assistance. Records showed that cardiopulmonary arrest rocketed to 4 times their usual rate. Some patients were struck by this life-threatening condition more than once. 11 died. An analysis of the hospital's records found no changes in the type of patient in the hospital that could account for this dramatic upsurge. So many breathing failures could not be accidental, and patients and staff quickly figured that a medical serial killer was on the loose. There were obvious clues: no telltale needle punctures or other marks on the patients' bodies, but a pharmacological investigation revealed that at least 18 of the victims, including 9 of those who died, had been given Pavulon, the trade name of the drug pancuronium bromide. This is a synthetic version of curare, the lethal plant alkaloid used by South American Indians to tip poison arrows and darts. Anesthesiologists sometimes administer Pavulon as a muscle relaxant during abdominal surgery. However, hospital records show that none of the victims had been prescribed the drug. The FBI were called in, and agents discovered that most of the breathing failures had occurred in the intensive care unit during the afternoon shift. All of the victims were fed intravenously, but the drug could not have been added to the drip. In solution, Pavulon would have been too dilute to work. The FBI concluded that, to administer a lethal dose, the IV solution would have had to have been disconnected and the drug pumped directly down the feeding tubes. Checking the work rosters, detectives found that 2 nurses from the Philippines, 29-year-old Filipina Narciso and 31-year-old Lenora Perez, were on duty in the intensive care unit during the afternoon shifts when the trouble occurred. Subpoenaed to appear before a grand jury, the women denied responsibility for the deaths. Nurse Lenora Perez was also identified by another patient as having injected his IV just before his respiratory arrest occurred. But he, like the patient who had identified Narciso, died before the trial. The case against Narciso and Perez was considered by Assistant U.S. Attorney General Richard Delonis to be highly circumstantial. Although the defense lawyers felt it was strong enough that they had to put their clients on the stand, or in the event they appeared evasive, there was only one charge of murder considered by the jury, with the other charges being poisoning. Both defendants were recent immigrants to the United States, and the trial was marred by accusation of racism. One man, originally slated to be the lead witness for the prosecution, referred to Perez and Narciso as, and I quote, "slant-eyed bitches," and asserted that there was a nationwide conspiracy of Filipino nurses to murder veterans. Racial tensions at the time were also running high due to high rates of immigration to the U.S. by Asian immigrants. The 2 defendants were the primary, though not always the only, nurses on duty during the poisonings. The prosecution emphasized the regular proximity of the defendants to poisoned patients. Although federal authorities could come up with no motive for the crimes and psychological tests showed their behavior patterns to be normal, the 2 nurses were indicted. Fearing that Neely and other witnesses did not have long to live, the authorities moved the case speedily to trial. In a hearing that lasted 3 months, the prosecution introduced 89 witnesses and took testimony from 17 acknowledged experts. The medical testimony left little doubt that many of the patients had received a muscle relaxant without prescription. However, the testimony of the lay witnesses that sought to prove that the 2 nurses were always present when respiration failures occurred was seen as both inconsistent and confusing. A proper epidemiological study was not introduced, and the prosecution was prohibited from introducing evidence concerning any respiratory arrests not in the original indictment. After 13 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. On July 13, 1977, they found the nurses guilty of 5 counts of murder, 10 counts of poisoning, and conspiracy to commit murder. Pacifico Marcos, president of the Philippine Medical Association and brother of Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos, headed a defense fund and called the verdict a miscarriage of justice. In February of the following year, a judge set aside the guilty verdicts, ruling that the jury may have been influenced by what amounted to prejudicial presentation of the prosecution case during the trial. The new Attorney General declined to mount another prosecution, reportedly because the American public were not behind the prosecution of the nurses, and the defendants were unlikely to make the mistake of exposing themselves to cross-examination again. Narciso and Perez had suffered as a result of their lengthy trial process. The prosecution of Narciso and Perez for the murders became a focal point for many protest groups and Filipinos who united in their condemnation of the handling of the case and expressed support for the 2 nurses. So although the prosecution was given permission for a retrial, they dropped the case. No new suspects have been named, so the killers are still at large. Hey everyone! I just wanted to express how grateful I am that you took the time to listen to my narration. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I am Twisted Mind and please enjoy the rest of your day. Salamat!